A man and a woman stand in the shadows of a ruined garden. The air is rapidly cooling. But if you look closer, if you listen to the exact phrasing God uses when he turns his attention to the serpent in the dust, Jesus says, "This is what the kingdom of heaven looks like." The promise of Genesis 3 is not a towering monument. It is an invasive species. It does not look like institutional power. It looks like a grassroots disruption. It does not grow in the sterile, high places of religious perfection. It grows in the messy, chaotic dirt of ordinary life. It spreads horizontally. It weaves through the cracks of the empire. It overtakes the garden from the ground up. The seed is small. The seed is hidden. The seed is subversive. But there is a biological catch. A seed cannot spread its life while it sits safely in the palm of a hand. It cannot conquer the garden while its outer shell remains perfectly intact. Days before his death, Jesus walks into Jerusalem. The crowds wave palm branches. The air smells like dust and victory. They want the cedar. They want the iron crown. But Jesus knows the violent mechanics of the harvest. A grain of wheat is a locked vault. When you read John chapter 12, verse 24, you find Jesus standing at the absolute height of his political momentum. The crowds in Jerusalem are chanting. Greek travelers are seeking him out. The world is finally arriving at his feet, and his followers are waiting for him to seize the throne. Instead, he looks at them and says, "Unless a kernel of wheat, there is a structural anomaly that changes how you read the rest of the biblical library, falls to the ground, and dies. It remains only a single seed, but if it dies, it produces many seeds." The word John uses here for kernel or seed is the Greek kakos. It refers to a single grain, a dry berry, an individual unit of potential. But it is the biological process Jesus attaches to this noun that disrupts the entire religious expectation of the century. When a kakos is pressed into the dark, heavy dirt, it does not simply sprout. It undergoes a violent dissolution. The hard outer husk must fracture. The moisture of the earth must flood the interior, breaking down the old structure, tearing the shell apart to release the life trapped inside. Without the breaking, the seed remains alone. Decades later, the Apostle Paul takes this agricultural reality and ties it directly back to the drying leaves of Eden. In Galatians chapter 3, verse 16, Paul explains the mechanics of the ancient promises. And when he writes the word seed, he uses the Greek word sperma, which is the exact Septuagint translation of that ancient Hebrew word, zero. Paul insists that the promise was not spoken to a plural multitude of descendants. It was spoken to one singular seed, who is Christ. That linguistic connection changes everything. The zera of Genesis 3, the singular seed that survived barren wombs, are famines. And the jagged rocks of Mount Moriah is standing in Jerusalem. Jesus is not just using a clever farming metaphor to explain his impending death. God makes a threat. He declares a cosmic war between the serpent and the woman. And then he says something that defies biological reality. He is announcing the terrifying mechanics of the ancient prophecy. The seed cannot crush the serpent's head while remaining a pristine, intact kernel on a pedestal. It must be plunged into the dark. It must be torn apart. The cross is not a tragic interruption of God's plan. It is the biological necessity for the harvest. Jesus is telling his followers that the violence they are about to witness is not a defeat. It is a planting. The iron nails, the rough wood, the Roman spear, they are merely the instruments breaking the outer shell. The promise has to die in order to multiply. So on a Friday afternoon, the tearing happens. The sky goes black. The veil is torn, and the seed goes into the earth. But the detail that changes how you read the resurrection is where they actually decide to put the body. They take the body down. The blood is already drying on the rough wood. The afternoon sun is fading. They wrap the limbs in linen, binding the torso tight, layering 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes between the folds of the cloth. The air smells like expensive grief. They carry the heavy, silent weight to a tomb cut out of the rock. But the Gospel of John includes a geographic detail that the other writers omit. John chapter 19, verse 41. He says this war will be fought between the serpent's offspring and hers. The judgment of Eden is not an eviction. It is a planting. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden. And in the garden, a new tomb. A garden. The eviction began in a garden. Under the shade of dying fig leaves, the return begins in a garden. In the cold dark of a hollowed-out rock, they roll the heavy stone across the entrance. They seal the dark. They walk away. The Romans think they have executed an insurrectionist. The religious leaders think they have silenced a blasphemer. The disciples think they have lost a king. The world looks at Friday afternoon and sees a burial. It is not a burial. It is a planting. The zera is finally in the soil. The shell is broken. The dark is doing its work. For 3 days, there is only silence. The earth holds its breath. And then, Sunday morning, the ground shakes. The stone is rolled back. The linen cloths are folded neatly on the cold floor. Completely empty. The seed has burst open. The life has multiplied. When Mary Magdalene stands weeping outside the empty tomb, she turns and sees a man standing behind her in the dawn light. She does not recognize his face. The text says she supposes him to be the gardener. This is not a case of mistaken identity. It is a profound theological truth. The first Adam was placed in the garden to work it and keep it, and he brought the thorns. The real question of this chapter isn't, why did they eat the fruit? It is this: the second Adam wakes up in the dirt of a new garden, leaving the thorns behind, stepping out into the morning light as the firstborn of a massive harvest. The seed survived. The head of the serpent is crushed. But that ancient agricultural pattern does not stop at the empty tomb. It reaches forward, out of the first century, and into the exact place you are sitting right now. We are a species terrified of the dark. When the forward momentum of our lives suddenly stops, we panic. A career collapses. A relationship fractures beyond repair. A medical diagnosis arrives in a sterile room. And suddenly, the lights go out. The air feels thin. The weight of the dirt feels like it is pressing directly against your chest. You wake up every morning to the exact same heavy silence, the cold reality of a season you did not choose. And the isolation begins to feel permanent. We look at our waiting, our breaking, and our darkness, and we draw the most logical human conclusion. We assume we have been buried. We assume the story is over. But we misread the agriculture of our own lives. We live in a culture that worships the harvest but completely despises the planting. What do you do with a promise that has to be buried in the dark before it can work? We want the cedar tree, fully grown and instantly available. We want the victory without the vulnerability. We want the iron crown without the wooden cross. But the kingdom of heaven operates on an entirely different biological clock. If you trace the zera from the drying leaves of Eden all the way to the empty tomb, you realize that God does his most profound work in the exact environments we are desperately trying to escape. From the perspective of the seed, the soil is a terrifying place. The heavy dirt pressing in on all sides feels like suffocation. The moisture of the earth tearing its outer shell apart feels like violent destruction. It feels like the end of the world. The seed does not understand that the pressure cracking its defenses is the very thing releasing its potential. The breaking is not a punishment. It is a prerequisite. The darkness is not a grave. It is an incubator. God does not drop his promises onto the clean, well-lit surface of our lives, where everything makes sense and nothing requires faith. He presses them deep into the messy, chaotic, uncontrollable dirt. He lets the outer shell of our self-sufficiency crack and splinter. He lets us sit in the dark until we finally realize that we cannot manufacture the life we actually need. Until the shell breaks. The life trapped inside cannot multiply. The pattern holds. The seed operates. For thousands of years, whenever God wants to explain how he rescues a collapsing world, he does not point to a sword, the exact same way in your history as it did in the ancient texts. And when you finally zoom out and look at the entire sweep of what God has been doing since the gates of Eden closed, You see the breathtaking scale of his design. The leaves in Eden withered, and a promise was planted in the dirt. The wombs of the ancient matriarchs stayed completely empty, and the seed arrived as a miracle. A father bound his boy on jagged rocks, and a ram caught the blade. A farmer threw his grain into the thorns, and the kingdom multiplied. A tiny weed took root in the neat rows of empire, and it overtook the garden. A Roman cross broke the outer shell, and the biological necessity was fulfilled. A sealed tomb went completely dark, and a gardener woke up in the morning light. One thread, one story. But here's the part I keep coming back to. The sheer recklessness of the sower. The fact that the farmer in Galilee did not keep his heavy leather pouch closed until the soil was perfectly prepared. He threw the seed onto the hard walking path. He threw it into the creeping thorns. He let the promise fall in the exact places that seemed completely, biologically incapable of keeping it alive. He does not point to an army. He points to the dirt. Jesus was not offering rural poetry when he spent his entire ministry. If you are in a season where the momentum of your life has suddenly stopped, where the dirt feels heavy and the long silence feels like an eviction notice, look at the pattern. You have not been buried. You have been planted. The pressure cracking your defenses is not your destruction. It is the beginning of your harvest. And may the God who has never been afraid of the dark dirt of your life hold you safe in the breaking until the outer shell finally falls away, and you see what he was growing all along. If this opens something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who feels like they are buried right now. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts, talking about sowers' bags, wheat, and mustard bushes. He was diagnosing a fundamental reality about how the divine interacts with human suffering. He was picking up a thread that started in the drying leaves of Eden. To feel the weight of this story, the fig leaves they stitched together in a panic are already drying out, turning brittle, scratching against their skin. You have to start with the vocabulary of the garden. The entire rescue operation of humanity hinges on one specific, highly vulnerable noun, and it is a word that will turn the rest of the book of Genesis into a war zone, dictating who survives, who bleeds, and why the most important women in the ancient world all wake up facing the exact same physical agony. When you read the English translation of Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, you find a word that seems like a standard biological term. God is speaking to the serpent in the dust, and he says, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." Offspring sounds clinical. It sounds like a genealogical record, a lineage of distant descendants stretching out into the future. But the English translation is masking a physical, agricultural reality. The Hebrew word used here for offspring is zerah. It appears over 200 times in the Old Testament, and it's primary. Literal meaning is simple. It means seed. It is the exact same word used in the first chapter of Genesis, when God commands the earth to bring forth vegetation yielding zerah. The soil beneath their bare feet, which was soft and yielding just hours ago, is beginning to harden into something stubborn. It is the hard, the dry kernel you press into the damp soil. But in the ancient Near East, applying this specific word to a woman is anatomically jarring. In the patriarchal mindset of the ancient world, the man carries the seed. The woman provides the soil, the womb, where the seed takes root and grows. A woman possessing the zerah is a biological paradox, an interruption of the natural, expected order of life. This is not a linguistic accident. It is a prophetic signature. When you realize the promise of rescue is tied to a woman's zerah, you suddenly understand the most frustrating, agonizing pattern in the rest of the book of Genesis. If you trace the family line tasked with carrying this seed forward, you hit a biological wall in almost every generation. Abraham's wife Sarah cannot conceive. Isaac's wife Rebekah cannot conceive. Jacob's wife Rachel cannot conceive. For decades, there is only the hollow silence of an empty tent and the bitter taste of waiting. Most readers look at the barren matriarchs of Genesis and see a series of unfortunate medical trials that God eventually decides to fix. But if you look through the lens of the Zerah, the barrenness is not a random obstacle. It is the theological point. The seed that will crush the serpent's head cannot be the product of normal human achievement. It cannot be manufactured by human striving, human planning, or human strength. God is speaking. The words echo through the trees. Heavy and final, thorns and thistles, sweat and pain, dust to dust. It must come as a sheer miracle from the outside, arriving in a place that has been entirely emptied of its own capacity to produce life. The lineage of the seed is marked, generation after generation, by human impossibility. God is establishing a rhythm. He is training humanity to recognize how his rescue operation actually works. The promise is not a towering oak tree handed down in full bloom. It is a seed. And a seed requires a specific kind of environment to activate. Before a seed can burst into life, its outer shell must be broken. It must be plunged into the dark. And for a father named Abraham, that breaking is going to take place on a jagged pile of rocks. An old man climbs a mountain. The boy walks beside him. The boy carries the wood. The rough bark scrapes against his shoulder. The father carries the fire and the knife. The air grows thin. The silence grows heavy. They reach the summit of Moriah. They gather the jagged stones. They arrange the dry branches. They do the unthinkable. Abraham binds the wrists of his son, the son who carries the Zerah, the son who represents the entire future of the human race. He lays the boy on the rough wood. He raises the blade. The metal catches the morning light. God tells him to stop. A ram is caught in the thicket by its horns. It feels like an ending. You can hear the finality in the air. A mistake is made. A verdict is handed down. An eviction notice is served. The boy breathes. The blood is spared. The seed survives. Most people read Genesis 22 and see a test of obedience. They see an ancient morality tale about a father proving he loves God more than his child. But look at what is actually happening to the trajectory of the promise. The seed of the woman was announced in a garden. It arrived through a barren, dead womb, and immediately, it is marched up a mountain to face the threat of extinction. Moriah is not a test of affection. It is a rehearsal. God is showing Abraham and the reader exactly what it will take for the seed to crush the serpent's head. The seed will not conquer by bypassing the altar. The seed will not win by avoiding the wood. It must be bound. It must be surrendered to the dark. It must face the blade of death and emerge on the other side. Isaac walks down the mountain alive. The line continues. But the pattern is set for the next 2 millennia. The Zerah is hunted. Pharaoh orders the Hebrew infants thrown into the Nile River to drown. A queen named Athaliah slaughters all the royal heirs of Judah. Same sequence. Again and again. Every time we encounter catastrophic failure, both in the ancient texts, except for one baby hidden in a temple bedroom. A Persian official named Haman drafts a royal decree to wipe out the entire Jewish population in a single day. The seed is starved in famines. The seed is carried off in bronze chains to Babylon. The seed is plunged again and again into the cold dirt of exile. The Old Testament is not a random collection of national history. It is the survival diary of a single seed. It is the story of a promise constantly hanging by a thread, protected only by a God who refuses to let it die. And then, the timeline shifts. The prophets go silent for 400 years. The dirt feels permanently cold. Roman boots march through the streets of Jerusalem. The tension is unbearable. And right in the middle of that historical suffocation, a man sits in a wooden boat on the Sea of Galilee. The crowd presses in, standing knee-deep in the salt water, just to hear him. And he doesn't talk about a fragile seed fighting for survival. He talks about a farmer who has so much of it. He throws it everywhere. In the agrarian economy of first-century Palestine, a seed is never treated as a cheap commodity. It is a calculated investment, carefully guarded in heavy leather pouches. And in our own history, we brace for the curse. We expect the gavel to fall and the screen to go black, representing the exact difference between a family surviving the coming winter or slowly starving to death. When Jesus sits in that boat, in Mark chapter 4, and tells the crowd about a sower who goes out to sow, the audience immediately understands the economic stakes. They know exactly how farming works in the rocky, unforgiving soil of the Galilean hills. You plow the ground first. You clear the heavy limestone rocks. You pull the creeping thorns by the roots. You carefully place the precious grain into the prepared furrows so that absolutely nothing is wasted. But the sower in Jesus' story does none of that. He slings the seed onto the hard-packed dirt of the Roman walking path, where the birds immediately devour it. He flings it into shallow, rocky ground where the fragile roots burn out in the afternoon sun. He throws it directly into the suffocating, sharp grip of thorn bushes. Most people read this parable as a moral test, a psychological warning to examine themselves and make sure they are the good dirt. But to a first-century farmer, this story is not a moral test. It is an economic scandal. The sower is not clumsy. He is aggressively, recklessly generous. If this way of reading the text is stirring up questions, most people read Genesis chapter 3 and assume it is a chapter entirely about what was lost. You've never considered. You're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So, the seed continues to fall. It falls in places that do not deserve it, in places that have not been prepared for it, in places that seem completely biologically incapable of sustaining life. For thousands of years, the Zerah of Genesis 3 was a fragile, singular line, heavily guarded and constantly threatened with extinction by famines, swords, and barren wombs. But now, Jesus is announcing a cosmic shift in the operation. The seed is no longer being hoarded in the lineage of one family or protected behind the heavy curtains of a temple. It is being broadcast across the entire world, scattered wildly into the darkest, hardest corners of human existence. The promise made in the drying leaves of Eden has multiplied. The divine rescue operation is spilling over the boundaries of what humanity considered safe or logical. But Jesus is not finished redefining the agriculture of his kingdom. Because when he finally explains exactly what kind of seed they are dealing with, he doesn't point to the mighty cedar tree that every religious scholar was expecting to see. He points to a weed. Jesus stands on the dirt road. The salt wind blows off the Galilee. The crowd listens. The religious leaders watch. They know their scripture. They read the judgment as a locked door, a permanent exile leaving humanity to fend for themselves in the cold. They know the prophets. They know exactly how God builds a kingdom. Ezekiel, chapter 17, painted the picture centuries ago. God takes a shoot from a towering cedar. He plants it on a high mountain. It grows massive branches. It bears fruit. Every bird finds shelter in its thick shade. A cedar is imperial. A cedar is immovable. Its wood smells of wealth, of temple beams, of endurance. It takes centuries to reach the sky. When the Messiah comes, he is supposed to plant a cedar. He is supposed to build a kingdom that crushes the Roman eagles and touches the clouds. Jesus holds up his hand. A tiny, black speck sits on his palm. A mustard seed. The crowd stares. The scholars scoff. A mustard plant is not a tree. It is a sprawling bush. It grows wildly. It grows low to the ground. It sprouts aggressive yellow flowers. It spreads rapidly through carefully manicured gardens. In the ancient world, you do not intentionally plant mustard near your crops. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder wrote about it. He warned that once it is sown, it is scarcely possible to get the place free of it. It takes over. It disrupts the neat rows of the harvest. It is impossible to eradicate once it takes root in the dirt.